Welcome to the third lesson in the series on Mrs Midas. Today we're going to be looking at analysing the poem. When you're starting to analyse a poem, you'll look at several different techniques. These include word choice, imagery, tone, structure and sound. We're going to recap on some of the techniques that you need to know about for analysing this poem. Firstly, word choice. Word choice means a specific word or phrase that the poets use to give a particular effect. That word has been chosen very carefully by the poet, and it has suggestions or connotations to it that enhances the meaning. For example, you'll notice in Mrs Midas that there are many words that relate to the idea of gold. A couple would be honeyed and straw. In each case, however, the effect of using that word will be much more than that it just references gold. Each word will have its own particular connotations and role to play within the poem. Here's an example of how to analyse word choice. I feared his honeyed embrace. The method here would be to look at the connotations of honey. As we know, it's both sweet and sticky. So why might his embrace be considered like honey? Mrs Midas sees his embrace as sweet in that she desires it. However, she would be stuck as a statue of gold forever. Therefore, it's also very dangerous. The word honey is clever as it's both desirable yet dangerous. It shows how the relationship Mrs Midas has with her husband has changed from being passionate to being life-threatening. Here's another example of analysing word choice. Let's look at the other one. That was the last straw. We can look at the connotation of the word straw and also where we might have heard the phrase that was the last straw before. Well, straw is a dried yellow crop, and the phrase the last straw is something that you say when you've had enough of something. So what is the effect of this phrase being used here? Well, it comes about near the end of the poem, where Mrs Midas is giving up on her husband. Her phrase, the last straw, is a colloquial phrase that you might hear someone say out loud when they're fed up. However, also cleverly includes the recurring idea of gold, as straw is a similar colour. Let's recap now on imagery. A metaphor is a direct comparison between two things. It's a description that is not literally true. For example, it says in the poem, he was spitting out the teeth of the rich. Here, Mr Midas is not spitting out teeth. He's tried to eat corn on the cob for dinner. As it's turned into gold in his mouth, the bits of corn cannot be eaten. They look like gold teeth. There's a sense of irony here, as in the past people who were rich may have had a gold tooth fitted. Mr Midas is greedy for wealth and would normally like the idea of having gold teeth he could show off to people. However, here the gold teeth is actually food that he cannot eat. It's one of the first signs in the poem that turning things into gold is a curse and not a blessing. Let's look now at simile. A simile is also a comparison between two things that's not literally true. However, it's not as strong as a metaphor. We're only saying one thing is like another, not that it is another. You can spot a simile when you see comparisons involving like or as. Here's one from Mrs Midas. It sat in his palm like a light bulb, on. Your analysis of this might be to look at a light bulb being used because it's the same size and shape as a pear. However, you obviously would not expect a pear to light up and glow, so it becomes quite an unexpected, magical image. Personification is a type of metaphor where a comparison is used that makes an object sound alive. And stanza 1 is a good example of this, where it says, the kitchen filled with the smell of itself, relaxed, its steamy breath gently blanching the windows. A kitchen cannot literally be relaxed or have breath, therefore this makes it sound like a person, hence the term personification. However, the image suggests the kitchen is like a friendly creature, producing heat and steam that fogs up the window. This is important as it means it obscures Mrs Midas's view. She goes from being relaxed, making dinner, to then realising that something strange is happening at the bottom of the garden. This changes the tone of the poem. Let's look now at tone. Tone is the way that something sounds. We usually describe tone using adjectives such as serious, witty, chatty. By figuring out the tone, this helps us to understand the attitude that the speaker has towards the subject. So here it's important as Mrs Midas is the one speaking, and the way she feels changes many times throughout the poem. I'd like you to stop the presentation to do a task now, to spot an example of some of the following tones from the poem. A sad tone, an angry tone, a scared tone. Pause the presentation now. So how does a poet create tone? Well, tone is created through the other techniques that you're learning to analyse. It's created through word choice, through structure, through imagery, and through sound. This is why you very often will be discussing more than one technique in your analysis of a particular line of poetry. Let's have a look now at structure. When we talk about structure in poetry, it can mean several things. We can talk about the form that the poet has chosen to write in. Structure can also refer to the way the poem has been laid out. You'll remember that in Valentine, the structure has various long and short lines and stanzas so that visually on the page it looks like an onion unpeeling. Very appropriate for a poem with an onion as the central metaphor. Mrs Midas is a lot longer poem. It's divided into 11 stanzas with 6 lines each. This gives Duffy the opportunity to have different sections which move forward in time as she tells her story. The breaks between stanzas also allow a pause. This can be used to good effect. Look at the break between stanza 4 and 5. What can we assume happens after Mr Midas tries to drink? Does this explain the reaction of Mrs Midas at the start of stanza 5? Two terms that are useful to know about are end-stopping and enjambment. Structure in poetry can also refer, of course, to sentence structure. As poetry is written in lines, a poet has two options when they reach the end of a line. They can end the sentence and put a full stop. This is known as end-stopping. You might know this from the classic example, roses are red, violets are blue, sugar is sweet, so are you. Or, what they can do is break the sentence and carry on to the next line. This is known as enjambment. Here's an example. I poured with shaking hand a fragrant bone-dry white from Italy, then watched as he picked up the glass, goblet, golden chalice, drank. Notice that this is actually one sentence, but it's split over 3 lines of the poem. The poets had to make a decision about where to split up this sentence for the best effect. Every time they take a new line, it creates a pause. So look at where the pauses come. Shaking hand and watched. It's emphasising here Mrs Midas's nervous reactions as she watches the transformation of the glass into gold. Long sentences like this are quite common in Mrs Midas. It's as if she's having a long conversation with someone and spilling out her thoughts. Let's look now at sentence lengths. Yet another way of looking at structure is by analysing the long and short sentences. You can imagine that in a dramatic monologue where one person is speaking, the commas and full stops become very important in creating the voice of Mrs Midas and the tone of the poem. For example, look, we all have wishes granted, but who has wishes granted? Him. You can see here that a question is followed by a one-word sentence, him. You can tell that Mrs Midas is angry and bitter about her husband's wish. Finally, let's look at sound techniques. These are really important for poets and can create a number of effects. Assonance is a technique where repeated vowels occur in the middle of words. Sibilance is where S sounds are repeated. Alliteration is repeated letters at the start of a group of words. Consonance is repeated consonant patterns in a group of words. And rhyme are words that have similar sound patterns. I'm now going to look at a full analysis of the poem. Thank you to the Learning Cauldron, which is a Perth-based tuition company, for producing some excellent resources on Duffy's poetry, which are available for free on YouTube. You can watch the following analysis lesson and click on the link. The Learning Cauldron also have a website, thelearningcauldron.co.uk, with an online shop where you can access MP3 podcast files and a number of other aspects of higher English. Follow-up activities. You'll see that in the video, all the analysis we've discussed in this presentation has been pulled together. This is similar to how you might approach analysing the poem in the exam. For the Scottish text paper, you will be given a copy of one of the poems in the exam with a set of questions to answer. As Mrs Midas is such a long poem, sometimes you're only given half the poem to tackle. Let's have a look at some of the questions you might be asked on Mrs Midas in the exam. Let's imagine that you get a question paper on Mrs Midas. There are two types of questions in the paper. The first few questions will be about the poem, and the last question asks you to compare Mrs Midas to the other poems by Duffy that you've studied. Today we're just going to focus on questions about Mrs Midas. Here are SQA past paper questions. These were the first three questions that were asked in the 2016 paper. Look at lines 1 to 12. By referring to at least two examples, analyse how the poet's language conveys the contrast in atmosphere between stanza 1 and stanza 2 for 4 marks. Look at lines 13 to 24. Analyse how the poet's language in these lines creates an unsettling mood for 2 marks. Look at lines 25 to 36. By referring to at least two examples, analyse how the poet's language presents the character of Mrs Midas for 4 marks. So how much do I write for each question? You'll notice that the number of marks for each question is specified. You should analyse one example from the poem for every mark in the question to make sure you cover yourself. Don't expect more than 1 mark's worth for anything you say, although in rare cases of brilliance you may be rewarded too. So, for a 2-mark question, give 2 examples. For a 4-mark question, give 4 examples, and so on. Let's look at the first question, which was, look at lines 1 to 12. By referring to at least 2 examples, analyse how the poet's language conveys the contrast in atmosphere between stanza 1 and stanza 2 for 4 marks. So you know you're going to have to look at both stanzas, and they've told you here already that there is a contrast in atmosphere. As you've already started studying the poem, you should remember this. In stanza 1, there is a relaxed atmosphere of everyday domestic life, right up until the end of snapping a twig, where things start to change. So what techniques could you pick out here to show the relaxed atmosphere? You want to look at least 2 and fully analyse them before you go on to look at stanza 2. I've used the same colour coding here as in the Learning Cauldron video. Picked out a few possibilities for you to think about. In orange, you've got the word choice here of unwind, relaxed and gently. You might be able to take one of these words individually and discuss its connotation and its contribution towards a relaxed atmosphere. There's also a couple of images that you can analyse. It's steamy breath. We looked at this one earlier. You could comment in full on this idea. Also, you could look at the idea about my fingers wiped the other's glass like a brow. This is a simile. There's also a lot in here of tone that is very relaxed. In fact, everything could be marked in green up until snapping a twig. But I have pulled out a couple of bits here that you could look at in particular. I just poured a glass of wine. The kitchen filled with the smell of itself and blanching the windows. You could pick out any of these phrases and discuss its contribution towards creating a relaxed tone. Think also here about structure. It starts with a short sentence. It was late September. Think about how that might contribute to a relaxed atmosphere of everyday domestic life. Lastly, think here about some of the sound effects. I've highlighted here in purple some of the repeated sounds that are going on. Cooked, opened one, fingers wiped, others, glass, brow. See if you can remember which sound technique this might be and why these sounds in particular might be helping to create a relaxed atmosphere. Next, you need to go on and look at stanza 2 to find a contrast. We know that the atmosphere does change here to an atmosphere that's more extraordinary and strange. You want to pick out 2 examples from here that show this and also fully analyse them. You might want to consider looking at word choice such as visibility poor or dark. There's also some images here that are important. The ground seems to drink the light of the sky is a really interesting personification. And also the simile, it sat in his palm like a light bulb on. The tone at the very end of stanza 2 is also really interesting because you really hear Mrs Midas's voice coming across. I thought to myself, is he putting fairy lights in the tree? You might also want to look at structure. Think about the positioning of the word gold at the end of the sentence, or the short one-word sentence on. You'll see that there's a lot more to choose from than you could possibly need. All you need here are 2 examples fully analysed. For further study, you can also try the other questions from slide 18. The marking instructions for these are available on the SQA website for the 2016 past paper at the link below.